hold space for your darkness, a first responder mental health podcast hosted by me, Erin Jane, where we have conversations about what it's like to perform a first responder role and the mental health challenges that can accompany it. Hello and welcome to another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. I'm your host, Erin Jane, and today I am joined by Justin Cotte. Justin is a former police officer from Washington State, where he served for 20 years, finishing up in 2002. He's held roles in patrol, corrections, as a canine handler. He was part of a U.S. Marshal Task Force for violent offenders. He was a critical incident investigator, which included officer-involved shootings, and he held a detective position with an ICAC task force, or for the internet crimes against children. He served as a volunteer for 1 year in Olympia Police Department and spent most of his time with Mason County Sheriff's Office. He's now a civilian investigator for the AJ's office in Washington State, and he's in the midst of studying his Masters of Science in Military and First Responder Psychology. So as you can probably imagine, Justin is right up my alley. Thank you for joining me today, Justin.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Erin. Appreciate it.
Awesome. And one of the things I would also love to share is that Justin spent, was it roughly sort of 10 years in Canada?
About 12 years, I think.
12 years. Okay. So a lot of your sort of like formative years, and you might still be able to hear that Canadian twang, because I certainly can.
Especially when I drink, but I'm sober right now, so you won't hear it as much.
Talk to me about what made you interested in joining law enforcement.
Literally the events of 9/11. And the ironic part is I was already living in Canada when that happened. And so, I mean, I was kind of Canadianized, if you will, at that time. But when it happened, I was just about to turn 21. And I was just, I was having fun. I was partying, doing what I think young men do without fully developed brains yet. I was working just, a mundane sales job. The money was fine, but I had no direction in life, essentially. And so that was never on the radar because I don't come from a family of cops or first responders at all, really. But just, I think probably like a lot of people watching that happen that day live, play out on TV. At least for me, it was utter chaos, obviously, right, and traumatic and all these things. But what stood out to me, somebody who was looking for direction and a job that meant something in life, was seeing all the first responders acting, relatively calm, considering that the world was coming to an end, at least in New York, right? And I've always liked helping people, whether that's, helping an elderly person cross the road or whatever. That's always been kind of my nature. And so when I saw that on TV, that's what I took out of that day, aside from, that this fucking sucks what's happening. But and that was it for me. And so I started looking into, well, how do I actually get into this career field? And that was, obviously September of 2001. By March or April of 2002, so less than a year later, I was already volunteering for because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do yet, so I was volunteering for both Olympia Police Department and Olympia Fire Department as well. But the fire side quickly washed out. That was not for me. So.
What made it like you go down the law enforcement route in particular? You just sort of were like, it's a bit hot. I don't really want to be fiery.
Really, it was the downtime and the fire side. Not enough action, not enough to do, and then the medical side of it, the medical calls and the first aid stuff. That just wasn't really for me. I wanted more of the action and the investigations and like it looked on TV, right? So
fair enough. Even though pretty much and something I've seen a lot in this country, like every firefighter's like, every cop wants to be a firefighter, whereas you are proving them wrong. You had the opportunity to do both, and you went.
But hindsight's 2020. Now that I've come law enforcement, I wish I did become a firefighter instead, 100%. But
exactly. There's always that wonderful rivalry, and so sort of was the drive in particular, like as a result of 9/11, which I think, you and I are only sort of like a couple of years apart. Like it was very much one of those like formative worldwide moments of like our sort of generation that I think everyone remembers where they were and what they were doing and all that kind of thing. So was it that drive that kind of made you want to come back to the United States, or like was your family still in Canada? Like how did that sort of work?
Yeah, no, I had no ties there, and so my parents got divorced in the Midwest when I was young, so I went to Canada with just my mom and my stepdad, and that was
Oh,
it.
okay.
And so then around that time, they actually retired from work and they moved to Arizona. So now I was alone in Canada, and so I had no ties there aside from British Columbia is beautiful.
Yeah.
Um, but when I looked into it, it was two things for why I moved to Washington. It was the cost of living and the
Mm-hmm.
salary. I literally came 4 hours south, which is where I still live, and I made more money and I paid less for a house. That was really the driving factor to come down here. So that it sold me. And then once I was here, I think a lot of people that got on the job realized, doing the lateral move, especially moving to a different state, can be a real pain in the ass. And so
That
I
makes
found
sense.
myself once I was hired, not stuck. That's not a fair assessment, but comfortable. And so 20 years later, I finally got out, but never left the department. Stayed where I got hired.
Mm-hmm. And I haven't been, but I've Washington State is just very beautiful, like lots of sort of incredible scenery and all that kind of thing.
For about 4 months out of the year, 4 or 5 if we're lucky, and then it's like they say it rains the rest of the year. It's still pretty,
Oh,
but you won't see sunshine for about 7 or 8 months, so it can have
oh,
depressing
that's rough,
addition
mate.
to it. Yeah, for sure.
And so, we sort of mentioned that you did you were sort of trying to figure it out between coppers and the fireys and all that kind of thing. And then you obviously got onto Mason County Sheriff's Office where you spent your career. Talk about sort of, what the process like was getting on and sort of all the different roles that you played, because like I sort of mentioned in the introduction, obviously you had a really significant career of 20 years, but you also clearly went in a lot of different directions throughout that time as well.
So Mason County, nothing against that county. It's a beautiful place to live and to work. That wasn't my first choice. Olympia,
Oh,
where I was volunteering, actually was.
oh, okay.
But without getting into full details, I lived a fun and slightly nefarious life in Canada. And so when it came time as, a 21-year-old to start the background process,
Yeah.
a lot of questions get asked of us. And their answer was essentially, "You're a good kid. Why don't you give it a few more years of staying on the straight and narrow and come back?"
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, shit. And so volunteering is no fun. There's no salary and benefits in that. And so
Yeah.
I started doing the testing around process, and a few other agencies kind of said the same thing. They're like, "You're not even
Okay.
22 years old. You've got a bit of a past. Come back in a few years."
Yeah.
Mason County, for whatever reason, they said, "Hey, kid, we'll give you a shot. Don't fuck it up on probation." And thankfully I didn't. And so, I kind of owed that to him, I think, to stay there.
Yeah.
Um, but no, so I was hired in corrections simply for the fact that was what was available. I
Okay.
wanted patrol. They weren't hiring for that at the time. So that's where I got hired first. Spent a few years there. It was fine. It wasn't for me. I knew I wanted to work patrol.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so went out to patrol as soon as I could, went through that academy. And then it's funny, when I got hired, the sheriff at the time, who was two sheriffs ago now, asked me, what are your goals and your ambitions? What do you want to do with this career? And looking back, I don't know why I said that, but as a young kid, I turned 23 in the academy. I said I want to do canine and detectives. That's just what blurted out of my mouth. I mean,
Yeah.
I love dogs, I knew that, but aside from that, I have no idea why that's what I said. Um, Other than detective shows were kind of cool, right? Especially like in the 80s and 90s, 21
Yeah.
Drum Street and stuff like that. So I worked patrol for several years. I was always volunteering to be the bite toy for the other canines. And when an opening came up, put in for it, got that. That was by far the best 6 years of my entire career. Everything else I
Mm.
did, was pale in comparison to canine. It was a blast.
Was
Um,
that when you got paired with Solo, your canine?
yeah, yeah, he was kind of an experiment. Usually the canines will come from overseas, things like that,
Oh,
and
do
the
they?
handlers will
Okay.
the handlers will get paired with them when they're about 2, 3, 4 years old. We tried breeding one of our in-house canines. He was papered in a pretty amazing dog that came from Germany with a decorated career, and so
Mm.
not me, but his handler and his wife, they bred him with a papered show dog, and only one dog came out of that litter, hence the name Solo. So kind of,
There you
I thought, and so I wanted that dog. I put in for it. I got paired with him at he was like 7 months old.
go.
So
Hmm.
really had a strong bond, and we had a good career.
Yeah.
But then, a lot of things happen, which I was already kind of just hypervigilant, stressed, going through some stuff at this point already. And then canines, a lot of stress, we're miles in the woods with maybe one or two guys going after armed people. So
Yeah.
it's all the added stress. I had a blast, and then with the marshals, I spent a couple of years just only going after felons is all we did.
Okay.
It was a blast, but again, all that hypervigilance, all this cortisol and high blood pressure, and as I was in my getting my late 30s at the time, and so he was getting older, and so I thought, you know what, I think I need to step back from patrol. Detective spot came open. That was always one of my goals. Put in for that, and I got that right after that too. I was pretty lucky. So retired him, got to keep him, which was awesome.
Yeah.
And then went detectives, and then kind of got to do a lot of fun stuff in there. We were a relatively small agency. We only had about 50 sworn, and so only 8 of us in detectives. And so I think because of that, I had a lot of opportunities that maybe I wouldn't have had I worked for a larger department. I got to stay on the marshals. I got to do the ICAC stuff. Got to do the 5 agency wide officer involved shooting and custody deaths investigation. So a lot of cool shit, but also a lot of hats, a lot of extra stuff to see and deal with. And so it all I think added up over time, for sure.
Say, like a lot of heavy shit. Like,
Yeah.
I don't see anyone coming out of a position like ICAC like completely unscathed.
Well, the funny thing, I put in for detectives at the point in my career when I did because I thought it would be a break. Many of the detectives that were working and came up when I was younger in patrol. Not to throw one on the bus, but I think times were a little different. It wasn't as busy. There wasn't as many violent crimes. And so I saw that and I thought, shit, that's kind of an easy gig, right? Come in, work a little overtime when you want.
Yeah.
And that's what it was sometimes. But then we had a run there where it was just a lot of homicides, a lot of bad shit. And then for whatever reason, I kept saying yes to all the added stuff, right? And so I was the only detective with no kids. And so they were like, hey, you want to do all the child sex crimes? But I was also the junior detective. And as any first responder will know, you don't say no to that shit, right?
Well, you
Especially as a
can't
junior.
too. You know what I
Right.
mean? It's like, fuck you, mate. Like, you're too bad, even if you don't want it. It's all yours.
Yeah, thank you. I may have another. And so for like a 2.5-year period, my only 2 jobs essentially were sex crimes, mainly the child sex crimes, and then the investigating the officer involved shootings and in custody deaths. So every day was either death or child
Depravity. Yeah.
100%. 100%. And then a lot of overtime, a lot of call outs. And that was also around the time, for personal reasons, some stuff that I experienced with loss of coworkers to suicide and other issues. I decided I want to go back to school. I wanted to educate myself, both for myself, but also kind of looking forward for my next career.
Yeah.
And so on top of all that heavy shit and being busy, I was also trying to do at the time I was doing my bachelor's degree. And so it was a lot. Yeah. A lot of sleepless nights, a lot of extra shit going on.
Oh yeah. I'm just like, I'm working on I'm like chipping away is like the very adequate term for like saying what I'm doing with my bachelor's at the moment. So
I hear you.
I can't even imagine like doing all of that, then going, I'm going to go home and watch a lecture and do some homework. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Jesus Christ. And sort of, so you joined, like, I think, we can sort of both look back and we're like, because I joined at the same age, I was like 21, 22, and you're just like, we were just babies. And like they give us these jobs and they give us a firearm and all of this responsibility. And I don't know about you, but I guess I never sort of had any foresight to even think about like the kind of things that you'd see. And I know, like, I always had that, just that, like, oh, I just like want to, be of service and help people and, all that kind of, like, I was always like the goody two shoes sort of girl. So, and then, like, and like you're saying, like all of these things that you end up dealing with and, we'd sort of been communicating offline that you also had a couple of, I would say, like, very heavy incidents where you and a colleague had been ambushed on a couple of occasions and shot at by like an unknown offender.
Yeah, it's, you hit it on the head. It's exactly that. I just wanted to help and do fun things. And then, I was naive as hell. I'd never been in a fight my whole life. I was always a pretty small guy. I didn't hit 6 foot until my senior year in high school. So I was always real short, real skinny until later in life. And And so I was a good talker to de-escalate things. Never been in a fight, never even been punched in my face till I went to the academy, and I got hit in the face by an instructor, and I was like, fuck, like, I don't know why I wouldn't have thought that would have happened in law enforcement, right?
Yeah.
But no, watching shows, I thought, oh yeah, you like write search warrants and do investigations and you chase bad guys. Like I've always been into adrenaline, like fun stuff, sports, whatever. And so that's what I thought it was going to be. And yeah, that was a part of it. But I guess I never realized how much death you see and just horrible, fucked up imagery that, like I learned in school, a first responder in a 20-year career will see like 300 to 400 traumatic events as opposed to like a civilian, maybe 2 or 3 in their entire life, let alone their career. And so I didn't know any of that, as you didn't either. And then to put where I worked in the context, the geographical area, roughly, depending on time of year, because we had a lot of tourism in summer, the population was generally around like 90, 100,000 people in the jurisdiction I worked. And when I first got hired, we didn't have any kind of minimum staffing. The sheriff's office, we ran the county, and we had several cities in the county, but only one was incorporated. Okay. So really, and I worked graveyard. And so it was not uncommon for about 100,000 people for me working graveyard as a 3-year-old, whatever at the time, in my early 20s, to work with 1, maybe 2 other cops in that whole county, all shift. And then we would pull constant doubles. So 16-hour shifts, not, no sleep, running on adrenaline. Yeah. Just death after drunken domestic, and just nonstop. And then, like you mentioned, the ambushes, I was fine. I think because I was young and I had a pretty coddled life, that I think I had some resilience, only because nothing bad had happened to me up until that point. Mm-hmm. So even though we were overworked, understaffed, busy, trauma, I think my brain wasn't full of enough shit yet to overload. And so I just kept barreling it down like we all do. Yeah. And it worked. Worked for a long time. But then one of those nights, it was me and only one other deputy for the whole county. And we went to a routine call. It was an armed guy. He was an asshole. He was shooting across the street at some neighbors. He was drunk. We dealt with him before, whatever. So it was just the 2 of us, middle of the night. And where we were at in the county, for anyone to respond and get to us was about from home, mind you, because everyone else was off duty, would have been about a 30-minute response time. Jesus. And so we thought we were being tactical. We parked down the road, pulled out our lawn rifles. Turned out where he was at, up in a heavily wooded area, and it was nighttime, he had the high ground on us. And so as we're trying to creep up, towards his property, shots rang out. And so, literally like 3 shots, like right in front of me, skipped across the pavement. I don't know how they missed me. And we both turned to return fire, but it's dark. I think he was about 60 feet above us on an embankment we couldn't see. Mm-hmm. So couldn't even see the guy to return fire. And so we hunkered down, and then for 30 minutes, we're by ourselves on shit radios. This is before good cell phones, trying to wake people up, dispatch, call whoever the fuck you need to get them here. And so, like an hour and a half later, SWAT team got there and they got the guy, with their armored vehicle and all that stuff. But, but then to go into the point is we're naive, and then the stress. And then also, this was a while ago, but still, mental health and how to take care of your people. Mm-hmm. You would think something like that would happen. And you'd be given maybe at least a day or 2 off.
Yeah.
Maybe
or even counselor. Just like an email. Hey, are you okay?
Yeah, no. And so I ended up working, I think, like an 18-hour day that day, because it just took forever to get people out there, get him in custody, and then we need to give our statements and all that. And then, I had to be at work the next day, And then the next day I had like a 4 kids died in a DUI accident. So I was dealing with that. And it's just, but that's our careers we sign up for. And we're not given appropriate time off or any kind of services to deal with these things, right? It's starting to change now, I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Slowly, depending where you're at, and slowly.
Yeah. But in particular, I think back then it was just kind of like brushed off or brushed aside. And as well, like all of the people who have come before you, there's just like that attitude and that mindset and the stigma of like, oh, well, fucking I've had to do it. So, step up to the plate, mate. Like you're up type of thing. So, talk to me about like, was sort of like writing notes before we jumped on, and it was something that I was really interested in, because you spent clearly a lot of your very like formative years where, you know, you really like develop into the person you are and get opinions and knowledge and all that kind of thing. And I would think as an outsider that America has very unique uh, gun culture and laws and all that kind of thing. How was that sort of coming from Canada, which I don't think maybe outside of hunting has a very massive like gun culture. How was that sort of like not only coming to the United States where it's like in their it's like their Second Amendment that they can have a firearm, and then you become a police officer and in a state where I feel like a lot of people probably have firearms and then get involved in these like multiple like ambush style incidents, like I just couldn't even fathom how like much of your time you would spend just in a constant state of hypervigilance. Like it really just I would feel like it would be exhausting for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, it got to that point. Because I did grow up in the Midwest when I was a kid, right? And so like my grandfather had hunting guns, a couple of shotguns, and we would shoot like clay birds. So I had like minimal exposure to a shotgun, and I never saw a handgun. And then going to Canada, yeah, you're right. I didn't know a single person that had a gun up there aside from the cops.
Yeah.
And they never pulled them for any reason. It seemed, at least where I lived.
Yeah.
And then so when I moved down here, got into law enforcement, I had to go buy my first. I never owned a gun.
Yeah.
And so I got hired, and they're like, at the time, they didn't provide us with firearms. So they're like, all right, well, you have to go buy a handgun. And I was like, where the fuck do I buy a handgun?
Seriously?
Like,
That's
yeah,
so
it's not.
random.
I know. And so, so I went to like a gun shop, and I was like, I'm here to buy a gun. And then they're like, what kind do you want? I'm like, fuck if I know. I've never even touched a handgun. You want to help me out here? And so, but then, yeah. And then where I happen to work, I've always lived in Olympia. I still do. And Olympia is a pretty liberalish city. Not everyone has guns here and stuff, but the surrounding areas and where I worked, extremely the opposite.
Okay.
Extremely rural, very, very gun toting heavy. And so I quickly learned that initially I wasn't that hyper vigilant. It was actually kind of a safety thing, as odd as it sounds, that everyone was armed, because every call I went to or every traffic stop I made, I already knew that person was armed. Like literally no shit. You'd pull over a grandpa and there was a gun on his hip. And so I think that almost made it less freaky, because you're not like, oh shit, every time you see a gun.
Yeah.
Until you're shot at. And that changes things, right? Because I was never in the military. A lot of my coworkers were. Some of them saw combat, and so for somebody that's seen that, I think probably not as much of a big deal. But I don't know. I mean, in training we would do force on force, and they train us. You can get shot and keep moving, but it's simunitions. It's fake bullets. Ain't gonna kill you. So after that first shooting, then it was like I didn't know what hypervigilance was yet at the time, because I wasn't going to school, was never taught it. I felt a little bit of it, but it's not until I was in another one about 7 years later. And the worst part about that was it was a routine call. It was just a 911 hang up, middle of the day, like 3:00 on a Tuesday. Just went by myself, or not, one partner to come with me after a few minutes, just to check on why did a 911 call come from here? When I got there, I heard one gunshot. And so I thought, for whatever reason, I guess it's a welfare check now. They must have just offed themselves.
Yeah.
But then shortly after that, then the fire just started ringing out through the front of the house and the back of the house. What the fuck's going on here? Ultimately, what that was, it was a younger guy in his 20s trying to do suicide by cop. But for whatever reason, he never came out of the house. He just kept shooting at us from inside of the house, thinking we would shoot back, I guess.
Yeah.
But again, we couldn't see him, just bullets flying over our head, and we don't know if there's hostages, what's going on. So again, and this was like a several duplex dead end street. So we were too busy not worrying about ourselves and evacuating all the adjoining neighbors and stuff like that, all the other residents. And so, like, speaking of America being gun heavy, when it was all said and done, there was like 37 shots fired at that one. And when he ended up killing himself after SWAT again got there, introduced CS gas, he didn't want to play anymore. But when that was all said and done, they searched the house. He was a felon. He was high on meth, whatever it was. And I think he had like 7, 8, or 9 guns recovered, all with his body. And it's like, what gun problem in the States, right? Like a felon with a mental health issue, and he had like 9 guns and decided to get in a gunfight with himself, and what kind of, I guess, tried with us. But
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but to your point of hypervigilance, after that call, it was kind of game over for me because I still really didn't know what it all was. We still weren't getting any kind of mental health training, anything like that. And after that call, it's funny. It was my dog was with me on that call, and I had parked kind of right in front of the house because it was a routine call.
Mm.
And a lot of the shots went right over my car. Thankfully, missed my car, missed my dog, and honestly, the worst part about all that was the fear in my dog's bark. As odd as that
Oh
sounds, but
no.
I knew his bark, and it was such a ear piercing, high pitched yelp. And he wasn't scared. He was pissed because he couldn't get to me, and he could tell that I was scared, I think.
Yeah.
Um, but the ironic thing about that is not only did it cause me to be extremely hyper vigilant after that, it broke him. He had always been calm at the range and stuff around gunfire because as a canine handler, we trained him to do that.
Yeah, of course.
He oblivious to it. He became super aggressive with any loud noises after that, and I became startled.
Yeah.
But I would, and that too. Again, going back to departments need to do better. That too. When it was all said and done, he killed himself. Okay, well, you're off for the day. Go home. See you tomorrow. Nobody checked on me. Wasn't asked how I was doing. Was expected to show up to work the next day. And then the next day I showed up, and one of the chiefs, he happened to be walking out when I was parking, and he came over and he just said, I always remember this, said, "You doing okay?" Yep, good, chief. What are you gonna
What
say?
are you gonna say exactly?
I went and drank like a fifth of whiskey last night to fall asleep, and I'm still a little fucking freaked out. You can't, we should be able to say that openly and not feel like we're going to be put on desk duty, whatever, but we're not there yet.
Yeah.
And then after that, yeah, I went to detectives only about a year or two after that.
Okay.
Because I was at the point there where I would go to like a neighborhood dispute over a fence line on day shift. You can't get more of a calm, even keel call than that as a cop. And I would get out of my car, like unholstering, like ready to, like, who's ready to throw down here today? And it's like, what am I doing? There's two 70-year-old neighbors that are just arguing about a fence property.
Yeah.
And I'm ready to get into shooting. And it was like that for every call, and at that point I was still in my late 30s, wasn't quite 40 yet. And, I'm not overweight. I work out all the time. I eat healthy. And my blood pressure was pinging.
Through the roof.
I was on 2 medications. My resting heart rate, if I was just sitting calmly typing a report, was like 120 because I was just pinging all the time. I was like, gee, I can't imagine why.
Was there a point or a time where you kind of had the realization and went, oh, I probably need to go talk to someone? Or any of your colleagues recognize anything going on?
Nope, not a single colleague. I don't know if anyone ever recognized it. But nobody ever said anything or asked how I was. So I'm gonna go with probably not.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing what I know now, I recognize all the signs now. But at the time, I didn't know other than something's not right here. And then, funny enough, what you asked though, did anything kind of make me realize I need help? Is I had broke my leg. It was a slight fracture.
Okay.
At work, but it was canine training. I was just jogging through a field doing a mock training, and I stepped in a hole and I fractured my freaking leg.
Oh, ouch.
And so I was at a routine doctor visit getting, I think, my brace off or something. And I was about to go on vacation for a long weekend in Canada, ironically. And I was off duty. I was ready to go on vacation, should have been very calm and happy and relaxed. My blood pressure was so high. Routine doctor visit, they just check the blood pressure, right?
Yeah.
And the doctor was like, I need to check that again. And then the doctor panicked and she laid me down, turned the lights down, called in for backup because it was so high. They thought that I was going to stroke out. And I was like, what's going on? I felt fine. And she's like, are you okay? And I'm like, you tell me, you're the doctor. My blood pressure had gotten so out of control.
And this was even on your medication and everything to try to stabilize it.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that kind of was an eye opener for me where I was like, okay, so after vacation, I'm going to look into some things here. And so I did go to some therapy, and then I just kind of nerded out, and I picked it with the help of the therapist, recommended some books, and I started reading every book I could on things like post-traumatic stress disorder, hypervigilance, meditation. And then around the same time, I went, if you've heard of float therapy.
Flow. Oh, I think so. Yeah, in
Yep.
like the in
The
the
vacuum tank.
enclosed sort of.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I went to that, and like, not to sound all like weird and hippy dippy and shit, but like I was floating in a fully deprived of any kind of sensories
Yeah.
tank for an hour and a half. That was life changing.
That's how long it goes for.
Yeah, it was 90 minutes. And the first 15, 20 minutes, I was fidgeting. I'm like, I can't do this shit. I was going to get out. And then for whatever reason, I stuck with it. And I tell you what, after that day, I picked up every book I could on meditation.
Mm-hmm.
I've meditated every day since then. That's been like 5.5, 6 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
And I, through therapy, but also like better diet, more cardio, less weights. But I tell you what, meditation and just learning how to calm yourself and regulate and stuff like that. I mean, I'm retired from law enforcement now too, but I'm down to one blood pressure medication, and my blood pressure is actually kind of low. I could probably come off it. So, yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
an impressive turnaround.
for sure.
And
Once you learn how to deal with things.
exactly. Can you sort of explain a little bit more about that, like floating therapy or sensory thing? Because I haven't heard much about it, and I'm not sure if like people listening will know exactly what it is.
As far as I know, you can even get it prescribed from a doctor, kind of like massage therapy or chiropractor or anything else. But I mean, as a hyperactive type person, it is difficult. But you go into it's a tank. It's almost like a closet, or a small but not too claustrophobic size area,
Mm-hmm.
and you close the door behind you, and it's pitch black in there, and it's just a tank, like a small pool or a large hot tub filled with it's only about a foot or two of water, and it's a
Yep.
very, very high salt um, level in the water, enough where you just float. You just lay on top of water and float. It
Mm-hmm.
sounds odd.
Is it warm? Is it cold? Is it sort of somewhere in the
Yeah,
middle?
it's somewhere in the middle. It's just
Yeah.
comfortable. But I mean, but it's hard to explain without doing it. But it essentially, it's like forced meditation, because our brains are always running a million miles an hour, a million thoughts, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or distractions, phones, smartwatches, outside noises, all these things. We're such a tech heavy, go go go, busy, chaotic life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this 90 minutes, there's zero distractions. It's pitch black. You can't hear anything. You can't smell anything. You can't see anything. You're just locked in there, and you're forced with nothing but your own brain. And my brain still raced for probably, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 minutes. But then I shit you not, probably because you're deprived from anything, any outside anything, or even
Stimulus. Yeah.
yeah, my brain like shut down is the best way to explain it. And I was calm for like the first time, probably in my adult, at least my first responder life.
Mm-hmm.
There was no threat, you know, um, no distractions, no inner struggles or any kind of issues. And it was just the most calming, relaxing thing ever. Where, I remember coming out of there, and I'm a very, I mean, I talk fast, I move fast, I walk fast. I'm talking my hands right now. But I came out of there, and it was almost like I was like medicated, or you know, I found myself being more present the rest of the day. I was walking slower, I was talking slower. I just felt like this
Wow.
like weird like ease to my life.
Yeah.
And it's kind of what meditation does now. After I do a session, I'm calm and at ease for a while afterwards. I still end up getting hyper at some point throughout the day. That's just my
Mm-hmm.
personality, but it always brings you back, and it kind of empties your brain, declutters things a little bit. And that's kind of where I first felt it, I guess, if you will. And I
Yeah.
was sold personally. So
And is that like now through your studies and all that sort of thing, like is that a common treatment and amongst like a particular modality, or for someone, specifically suffering either from like trauma exposure or anxiety or anything like that? Is it particularly aimed at anyone like that?
yeah, I mean, your veterans, your first responders, with PTSD, hypervigilance, things like that. Obviously, therapy, EMDR for like intrusive memories and
Mm-hmm.
flashbacks is more specific. But for general like anxiety or trauma related, you know, issues that we may be having, like hypervigilance, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Massage, and then meditation. I mean, meditation, there's endless studies. Anyone can go to Google and Google brain scan studies on active
Mm.
meditators versus non. And, they'll do like side by side brain scans of somebody who doesn't meditate in our line of work and somebody that does. and it's the colors in the brain. I mean, it just changes drastically.
Yeah.
The calming effect that it has, that evidence shows, and it's flow therapy is kind of right up in line with those things.
And is that something that like you still do like to this day, or it was very much that kind of showed you the power of being able to kind of shut everything out, and then like meditation has kind of taken over for that?
Yeah, the latter, totally. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Um, and you sort of like shared like offline that you had sort of like some challenges and stuff like really sort of earlier on in your career, and you like a breakdown of a relationship and all that kind of thing, and that you had probably more like maladaptive coping mechanisms back then, turning to like substances and alcohol and stuff like that. After you sort of got to a place where you were sort of through that, like did you find that it was sort of maybe like an issue just because of like the common nature of, I think like all first responders, it's like a lot of us turn to alcohol because it's a social thing and it's a coping strategy and all that kind of thing. Was it something that sort of plagued you like throughout your career, or was it really just something that you kind of had struggled with but then kind of got a handle on?
Yeah, it was I was still new in the career, right? I mean, early 20s. I mean, our brains aren't even developed fully until we're like mid 20s, 25, right? And here I'm already carrying around a gun and a badge with arrest powers prior to that. It's kind of problematic, but then I went through a divorce, very brief marriage. Anyone in their early 20s looking to get married, just don't do it. Wait, just date them. Wait till you're in your late 20s and see if it's going to work out. But yeah, and so I was already at the time I was getting paid terribly. Um, at least in this state at the time, early 2000s. And then with the divorce, lost a house. I mean, literally was living paycheck to paycheck, working doubles every shift because I was still new enough where I was getting all the rookie mandatory overtimes,
Yeah.
and then all of the traumatic scenes at work and all of that. Yeah, I mean, to avoid things, a lot of us first responders do it. You go hang out with your other first responders and you drink. It's just like the club that we're all belonging to, and it's normalized
100%.
still, right? But that was bad enough. But then where it became problematic because you'd go out and you drink with your buddies for 3 4 hours and you're already drunk. But then yeah, I would find myself going home, and to avoid that home situation, keep drinking,
Yeah.
right? And then you wake up hungover and go to work, and which is not a line of work you want to be hungover and you need to be
Right.
sharp, right?
Yeah.
And it got to the point too where again, this where it comes to agencies and coworkers needing to like step up and say something, look out for our people. Is there was more than once where I would show up to a training or something and they'd be like, "Man, you must have threw it hard last night. You reek like booze," but we laugh about it.
Yeah.
I'm not saying report your coworker on every circumstance depending on what it is, but somebody should have said something or at least asked like,
Yeah.
"What's going on? Why are you doing whatever?" And no, it's just one of those things which still happens to this day. We all do it. Let's not talk about it. It'll get better. That's not how that gets better, right? Um,
Yeah.
so no, I mean it came and went, but it pretty much it came to an end around the time of all the other hypervigilance and other stuff where I needed to make a decision, and that was part of the blood pressure too. It's time to cut back a little bit, right, and
Mm-hmm.
reevaluate things. And so, but it was the worst when I was early on for sure, because that
Yeah.
was just being a young person that doesn't know how to deal with anything life, let alone the career issues.
Yeah.
That was where I turned, and so a lot of my coworkers and some others weren't as fortunate. They didn't make it out. They got shit canned for DUIs or what escalated into domestics, things like that. And
Yeah.
so it could have been worse, I suppose. But
Yeah. No, that makes
it's
sense.
definitely an issue that plagues us. Yeah.
It really is, I know, right? And it's sort of we'd also spoken offline a little bit, and I guess last week was National Police Week, and we are currently still in like Mental Health Awareness Month. And I think you probably know, just as well as everyone else in this sort of first responder mental health community, that suicide is a big issue amongst first responders and in particular police officers. And I'm aware that you lost a couple of colleagues from neighbouring departments along the course of your career, and that has sort of perhaps helped shaped, where you're at in terms of looking ahead to want to help them in like that mental health space. Are you able to share anything you're comfortable about, the colleagues you lost, or how that experience was, and I guess maybe even how it affected you, not necessarily like in that personal sense, but also you kind of go, well, shit, these people are doing the same job as me, and like they're fucking finding it too much.
Yeah, it's I mean, doing like all the papers I have to write for grad school. I mean, it's for forever as far as it's documented. But still, you would think with all the money getting funneled into mental health and things are starting to change for the better now, I think, in this country. But still, every single year, there's no deviation. Every year, more cops are still dying by suicide than in the line of duty deaths.
Yeah.
And every year there's more cops getting killed by felons with firearms, whatever it may be. Doesn't matter. We're still killing ourselves more. So I don't know. Maybe we're not doing things right still. I don't know, but yeah, it definitely comes back to, again, agencies, peer support. We all can do more, and we're all still very cliquish, like high schools, when it comes to gossiping and all that. Which doesn't help anything when people are on a dark space. Yeah. But the first one, I wasn't per se directly involved in. He worked for a tribal agency in my county. We had 2 tribes, and he was off duty. We had a party complaint, domestic disturbance, male and female, and so I had got there to back another officer. And as I arrived, a car was fleeing at a high speed, and so I stopped it. That's suspicious. Clue. And it was this tribal cop that was hiding in the back seat, highly inebriated. And so I'm like, bro, what's going on here? Like, this is awkward. And so didn't detain him or anything, but just like hang tight a second. Yeah. Allegations were thrown about possible domestic he was involved in. So that escalated things. We didn't have any proof. There wasn't any arrestable offense that night per se, but it was enough of an issue that I brought it up to my supervisor. You know how that goes. Yeah. Went to his police chief. He was put on immediate IA. Probably an appropriate response. It is what it is. But he quickly spiraled, then got a DUI, then got a divorce, and then took his own life. And so one of those things where now looking back, it's like, what pieces were in place that might have helped him?
Yeah, there was
0
support.
There was no peer support back then. I surely didn't call and check on him. Nobody else did, to my knowledge. And then when things started spiraling even worse, when he got that DUI and the divorce, again, was the agency reaching out, sending any help, offering any services? No, because we just didn't do that back then. And frankly, a lot of agencies still don't.
Yeah.
So, that one kind of always stuck with me, obviously, because I don't say I blame myself, but I had an involvement in the initial spiral.
Yeah.
And so that sucks. But the one that really changed everything for me, my mindset, it got me interested in further educating myself, and then really got me thinking on, do I want to be a cop forever, or do I want to do something else where I can try and help our first responders? Because there's clearly issues here and they're not going away or getting any better. Yeah. Was a trooper in the county I worked in. We consider them kind of coworkers, though, because we were so rural, especially working night shift. We would only have 2 or 3 troopers on at a time for the whole county. Okay. And so we just called them like our adopted deputies, because we would constantly back them and vice versa, because we were understaffed, right? And so he had gone through an alleged domestic. I wasn't involved in that. Mm-hmm. But as you can imagine, a fellow cop's involved in anything possibly criminal. What do all the other cops do? Oh my God, did you hear about so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. And then we're all like little, hens in a chicken coop. And I took part of it too. And I should have known better. But we still all do that. Somebody should have the balls or the wherewithal to be like, you know what, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
That could just easily be you. And do you want all your coworkers talking about this stuff behind your back when we don't even know if it's true? It's merely an allegation on his ex, who had some substance abuse and some mental health issues. So it's like, could have been bullshit. And it was. But his agency put him on admin leave. Again, not blaming the agency. That probably should be standard protocol.
Yeah.
We're held to a higher standard. I understand that. But I was on duty. One of the days he was on admin leave, 911 call came out from his house. I immediately recognized the address. Yeah. It was just a 911 hang up, but something, we all call it the spidey sense, whatever. Yeah, I'm like, no, something's not right there. And I think I was less than 5 minutes away from his house. Mm-hmm. And so I ran code, wasn't a code response, but I was like, something's not right here.
Fuck it. Yeah,
I was
just go.
there. Yeah, I was probably there in like 90 seconds. And I remember going to the front. I got there and it was eerie, calm silence. And I went to the front door of his house and, somebody called 911. His kid answered the door. And I was like, oh, this something just didn't sit right. I knew.
Yeah.
And I think it was his parents or there were some other adults there. I can't remember now. But I said, is so-and-so here? And they're like, oh, he's just in the back shed on the property. Is there a problem? I said, just stay in here. I just knew, and then, yeah, he was down, booted the door, gun smoke was still fresh. Yeah, horrible. And that one made me realize that, nobody is doing anything for us. We're all trained and we're paid to help everybody that can help themselves. And that's fine because clearly people out there need first responders because there's a lot of people that can't even wipe their own ass, let alone keep themselves out of trouble and everything else, right? I mean, it's an unfortunate thing about society. But for whatever reason, that was, and both of these happened in a few years from each other, and we're a small jurisdiction, and so I know it happens more in larger cities.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter. It shouldn't be happening as much as it does. And so that made me realize. Around the same time, I had been seeing a therapist. I was trying to find a therapist for some coworkers to help them with their issues, and there was none. Washington State's not a small state, and there was like 2 or 3 that I was trying to vet, and either were like former law enforcement or maybe married to a cop or had some kind of likely cultural competence and like understanding and respect that I know I could send a cop to, and they wouldn't just tell him to fuck off and not trust him. There was like 2 or 3 in the whole state. And then of course their backlog, they're like, yeah, I can see your coworker or you, in like 6 months. Like, well, we might be dead by then.
Yeah.
And so, I decided I'm gonna go back to school. I don't know what I still don't know. I don't know if I want to be a therapist or teach, or I don't know, but I know I want to do something to try and help us because nobody else is doing it. Some agencies are implementing great things, wellness teams and all these things, but most really aren't. Let's be honest. It's just they're getting grant money, and they're maybe doing like some training every now and then, death by PowerPoint, whatever. But we need to be doing like from day one at the academy, teaching things like mental resilience and mindfulness techniques and normalizing seeking therapy. Like, I honestly, if you get hired as a cop or a firefighter, paramedic, whatever it is, day one, you should find a therapist.
Yeah.
I mean, the academy is stressful. You're going to see a dead body or something traumatic probably in the first week, if not month, of whatever first responder career you're in. So why not be proactive and getting therapy from day one? But if all this isn't normalized and paid for and explained and taught at the academy level and then normalized and continued throughout our career, nothing's ever going to change.
Yep.
And so that's the path I'm on now to, try and figure out what I want to do when I grow up, but in some fashion, something to do with that. Cause it's clearly, like I said, this year again, so far, there's more suicides than line of duty deaths. We're in 2024 now.
And there's been a lot of fucking line of duty deaths in this country. Like I did an episode about it like a few weeks ago, and I can't remember the stats off the top of my head, but I think there's been like probably close to like 140 or 150 line of duty deaths, and equally around the same amount of suicides of just law enforcement officers, not like including everyone else. It's just it's horrendous, and I think you and I are sort of in like similar situations where it's like, and obviously like your career was, a lot longer than mine, but like you kind of find yourself like you're part of this community and this like organization and, population for so long. And then you kind of just go, what do I want to do now? Like I still want to be a part of it, but I kind of just want to be able to help in like a different way and in like a different capacity. And, like you're saying, like, I don't remember getting taught about anything like mental health related. Like when, you go through the academy, like we get taken to like the coroner's office, and we like go into the morgue, and we're like the, coroner gets up and has like a chat while there's like a couple of dead bodies in the background, and you're just like, oh yeah, okay. And I was like a 21, 22-year-old kid. Like that was really confronting because I hadn't seen a dead person before. And I was even having a conversation the other day. And so, I was a first responder and now I'm the spouse of a first responder. And I think, it kind of needs to be matched up. Like there needs to be, like you're saying about like that resilience training and being given like the tools and being proactive and preventative, but equally like I feel like there should be this information source too for spouses, because we're the ones at home who are going to see the change in behavior and see the drinking and see the hypervigilance and the all of the things that happen. And then you're kind of like, well, what the fuck do I do with this? Like, and then if
Yeah.
they're not told at the get-go, like, oh well, this is perhaps a symptom of this, like these are all of your resources, let's fucking, let's go and access some of them. Like people don't know where to turn, and then they think that they're the only ones,
Yeah.
and they feel, shame, and they don't want to be judged, and all of the things. Like, and like, you're saying like the tide is turning, but I think part of it as well, like, where I come from, and I'm not sure like what Canada was like, but you just had like a state police force. Each state just had one police force, and then you had like a federal police force. Like, I think part of the issue in this country is that there's like all of the tiny little departments and sheriff officers and state troopers and the this and the that. Like, there's just so many. Like, who can keep up and who can access all of these people?
Right.
It's
Right.
yeah, I don't know. I don't I don't claim to know what the answers are, but you know, we'll
And like you mentioned too, you're in this unique situation where you were a first responder for a long time, and now you're still the spouse of one, and so it's like, what it's like as a first responder. Either you're going to want to go home to your spouse and talk about it, or you're not going to want to burden them with it.
yeah.
So you kind of screw either way, because you're not being open, you're not communicating, or you're sharing things that honestly, what you're not really a true civilian because you've done the job, but if you were, the flip side is you either don't communicate or you over communicate to somebody who isn't trained, equipped or prepared to hear these things that we deal with.
And then that,
And
yeah.
so, yeah, so like now in your situation, you may not be directly experiencing trauma anymore, but now you're for sure experiencing secondary or vicarious, if your spouse is sharing things with you or whatever it may be, or just witnessing, issues he may be having, that could trigger feelings you've had before, whatever. And so
Yeah.
that's why you're 100% right. Yeah, the spouses and family need the education and the training as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of that could be handled at the academy level if everyone's brought up to speed from day one.
Yeah.
Again, not to knock on my state, but it's pretty liberal and forward thinking state. But I was up at our academy for fun because I'm just a nerd and I like go and watch like mental health related trainings and stuff. This is a couple of years ago now, but and I could be a little bit off on the hours, but I want to say it's like 4 to 8 hours for like a 6-month long academy that we're getting, where the new cops are getting like mandated mental health training for yourself now. But in the scheme of things, we're getting hundreds and hundreds of hours of, use of force and in case law and all these other things, which yes, it's all important, but it's like this, and it needs to be like, I mean, at least like this, if not like even par, right?
Yeah.
I remember doing all the force on force mock scene situations in the academy where we literally would kick the shit out of each other and we'd shoot each other with simulations and all that.
Yeah.
It's appropriate because you need to weed out people that maybe don't have the mindset or the wherewithal to be able to get through those situations.
Kind of sounds like fun too.
And it is, but why aren't we also, when that situation is done, they do a quote unquote debrief of, what went wrong, what went well. Why can't you also have somebody there who's a mental health therapist or a yoga practitioner that's certified, whatever? That was really stressful. We understand it was fake, but to keep things real, that was stressful. That's finished. The scary stuff's over with. Let's go do 5 minutes of like deep breathing or mindfulness work or like a quick yoga, whatever. It's 5 minutes of your time. It's really nothing.
Yeah.
But it still isn't being incorporated.
But yeah, and you're right. Like if it is incorporated from the get-go, then that's all that they know. So then they know that this is like a normal practice, that they know that it's natural and it's like a human response to be affected by things. So if that's normalized from the get-go and then throughout the course of their career, we can err a little bit more on the proactive and the preventative side, as opposed to fuck me, you've been in for 20 years and you've, buried your head in the sand for that long. And now, like, your cup's overflowing, your backpack's full, whatever, like,
Yeah.
analogy people want to use.
Yeah.
And then it's like such a struggle to then find a place of health and a level of like normality to be able to exist in the world when you have all of that trauma exposure. It's
Yeah.
yeah, so
That's
we'll
what I
just
say too. Like, I mean, I think maybe a small handful of agencies are doing it now, but mandatory wellness checks or therapy checks, whatever you want to call it,
yeah.
that too, again, if it's implemented from day one at the academy and
Mm-hmm.
then it's gone throughout your career, including, we all do this in-service training every month, every other month, whatever it
Yeah,
is, where you're doing ground fighting and your PowerPoint and all this shit. Why can't we all have a mandatory paid hour with a contract therapist as well? Not only would
100%.
it probably be good for us,
Yeah,
a lot of people might not want to talk, that's fine, but a lot of people might want to talk because they're already there doing it as part of the mandatory training. And then if everybody kind of like if you're learning this stuff from the academy and it sticks with you, it's normal, it's part of your career.
yeah,
If we're all getting paid and encouraged to do
yeah.
these therapy wellness checks, and I mean all of us, not just your road people, but your
Mm,
police, your sheriffs, your command staff, if everybody's doing it, it's not going to alleviate all stigma. Obviously, a lot of alpha personalities. Oh, I'm too good for this shit. That's always going to be exist, but it's going to destigmatize it a lot if
yeah,
everybody's doing it and they're mandated to do it,
yeah,
and then people might be actually open to talk about things.
yeah.
Or right now, good luck walking in a squad room being like, "Oh yeah, man, I had therapy last weekend. What'd you do?" Nobody's talking about that shit still, and I don't know why not. I mean,
Yeah. No, that makes sense. And I
we,
don't
we all,
know if you're aware of Travis Gribble. He does
yeah,
my arena. Yeah. And so yeah, he is like out there promoting, like, he thinks, should be like twice yearly, and there should
at least.
be and then like brain scans at the start of people's
Yep,
career so you can track all
yep,
of the things. And I think as well, like, from sort of you know, my perspective of what I'm thinking is that, like you're saying, there's always going to be people who are resistant, but like if they're getting paid, right, to go and sit there for an hour, and counselor, therapist, whoever like is there, regardless, what, even if they just go and shoot the shit for an hour, right, it's still building rapport with that therapist or with that counselor, so that if they do find themselves in a challenging place where they are feeling affected, then they're already going to have that rapport built up with that person, instead of already feeling completely vulnerable of like, fuck, I know I'm not right and something's wrong, and then having to then go and open themselves up to like a complete stranger. Like, that level of rapport is already there. I feel like that's kind of going to break down some of the barriers, and especially if that person is culturally competent.
yeah, 100%. And, at least in my personal experience, the and I say the guys, and there's females out there too, but it is majority guys that are the big talkers, the shit talkers of therapy and mental health. Oh, it's for pussies. It's people are still saying it.
Yeah.
It's in my experience, it's your real the alphas of the alpha, the department. It's your SWAT team commanders. It's I've seen it in Canine. I've seen it in the Marshals.
Mm-hmm.
The guys that are the most outspoken about this is pussy, this is stupid, are the ones that frankly need it the most. They've been in the most officer involved shootings. They've had the most divorces. They drink the most. And it's not to say that the mandatory wellness checks are going to fix everybody, but exactly to everything you just said, if they're mandatory and they're occurring frequently, some of them are going to break down. Human nature is they're going to eventually start to trust and open up and realize that I'm a little fucked up too, and maybe I should stop talking shit about it because it's helping a lot of my coworkers. And hey, look, I'm feeling better. I've only been in 2 shootings this year instead of 5.
Exactly.
It's just a matter of principle.
um, and I guess sort of one of the main things I wanted to ask you about as well is, did you find, like, obviously you had engaged in some therapy prior to the end of your career, and that probably helped you come to the realization where you were like, it's probably time that I jump ship. Did you find, sort of, once you had stepped away, was there like a healing process that you felt like you had to go on, or sort of like a significant level of like readjustment to kind of slide into civilian life?
Yeah, a little bit. It was mostly just the hypervigilance went away because I wasn't responding to calls and wearing a badge and all this anymore. But I realized my partner's phone would go off and I would react to it and she'd be like, what's wrong? And it's because I was so between detectives and canine from 2012 until 2022, so 10 years. I was on call 24/7. And so again, one of those things you don't realize until I was retired, the
Oh my
phone or
goodness,
text or phone would ring
yes.
and I would be like, fuck, I don't want to go. I'm like, oh God, I don't have
You're
to.
like, it's
It's
not
Friday.
me.
I don't have to do anything work related for
Yeah.
2.5 more days, And so that was the biggest adjustment for me, is learning how to just live my life and not
Yeah.
switch off and stay off, and not have to always worry about. I mean, I would plan my personal stuff. I love to go hiking and vacations and stuff. I
Mm.
would plan it around work because I'd be like, ooh, it's whatever, 4th of July weekend, guarantee somebody's getting shot. I'm gonna get called out. Maybe we shouldn't go anywhere this weekend. It's like, the fuck. I mean,
Yeah.
I now I'm with the state, and I get PTO, paid time off occasionally, like everybody else, and it's like now I'm at the constant balance where I almost don't have any because I'm constantly going on vacation. I mean, I've been to Europe twice in the last like 8 months
Yeah.
because we earn that time. But as first responders, most of us don't want to take it because we feel obligated to always go to work and we can't leave our team short.
Mhm.
But also we're always overworked and understaffed, and it's always getting shot down. I mean, time and time again, I put in for vacation, denied. The shift is too short. Um,
Jesus.
and so when I retired, I walked away with a paycheck for, I think it was 820 hours vacation, because I just didn't take it or was always told I couldn't. And now I've been at the state for 2.5 years and I have like 20 hours vacation because I'm constantly getting it, using it because nobody ever says no. Yeah, it's your
Yeah.
vacation. Take it all. So those are the biggest adjustments, is learning how to live my life, and not for everybody else, but for me, and learning and knowing how to stay relaxed because nothing bad's going to happen anymore. Nobody's going to call me
Yeah.
out. I don't have to see this shit anymore or deal with it. Or I just do a job now and study and do what I want to do.
Yeah.
That was the hardest part.
Yeah.
But I do find now, it's been like over 2 years. And well, like I mentioned earlier, I probably have to come off the one medication I'm on now because I still check my blood pressure out of habit. And some days it's like it's too low. And I think that's because I finally have realized how to be calm and remain calm throughout the day.
Mhm.
Probably because I telework. There's like literally no threat in my house, right? I don't have to drive to work because I still get angry. I did hear your one podcast about or something that you had posted about, no matter how long you're out of the career, you can't help but still get pissed. You want people to get the fuck out of your way when you're driving because you're so used to it. And it really resonated with me because still, I mostly telework. When I do have to drive to work, I get so fucking irritated still. And I'm not a real bad speeder,
Yeah.
but just fucking move over. Like, I miss my whoopee
Oh,
lights
I
sometimes.
know, right? Oh, I mean, look, I live in Massachusetts, so people in Massachusetts are known as massholes because we drive like assholes.
But,
But yeah, like, and I'm a very impatient driver. I think
yeah.
my kids know how to swear because they come in the car with me, and
Backseat.
it's shocking. And like my 7-year-old, he's such a sweetheart, and I'll like say something and he'll be like, yeah, that person was a bloody moron. And I'm like, good change of those words, buddy. Yes. And I'm always like,
Yeah.
sorry. But it's mate, I cannot like, so I used to do like on call work when I worked at the crime department, and you would have like maybe a weekend or like a couple of overnights or something like that. And I still remember, like, you'd had your phone beside you, and I never slept well because you were always like, oh, did I miss it every time you woke up? And I'm like, I
Yeah.
cannot believe you did fucking 10 years of that. Like, that
That's
just,
terrible. My 40th birthday, my girlfriend took me away to a gorgeous winery in Washington State. There's a lot of them, but it was awesome. We were like almost off service. I wish we were,
oh,
'cause we were so far out. But it was my
yeah,
40th birthday, having the best time. And then we had a homicide. We had a body dump in my county, and they didn't call me in, but my phone, and they all knew where I was at, what I was doing,
yeah.
celebrating my 40th. My phone kept blowing up. Guilt trips. Hope you're having a good 40th. Here's a photo of this body dump where
Oh,
we've worked 20 hours straight. And motherfucker, it bugged me enough where I finished out the weekend, but the
yeah.
second I was home, I strapped on, went to work because I felt terrible. And then I think I ended up writing, I worked for like 24 hours straight, first day back. And I think I wrote like 36 search warrants on that case
Oof,
because I felt so bad. Why? That was my time off. That was my birthday. But
yeah.
we all get stuck in that team mentality where we all have to put in the same amount of work, or we're the asshole, and it's unfortunate. It shouldn't be like that.
Yeah, and it is funny, and I think I like remember from my time in too, like you're like, yeah, you have that kind of community, and it's like you show up early for the person you're taking over from, and
Yep.
equally like the next person is meant to kind of do that, and yeah, you stick around and give people a chop
Yep.
out and all that kind of thing. But then there are like those unique like outliers who just give zero fucks, and
Yeah.
they rock up late, they try to leave early, all of the things, and that like nothing rubs you up the wrong way more than those fuckers. But you kind of like you're saying, in hindsight, you're kind of like,
Yeah.
maybe like they didn't
They were
necessarily
the
have
smart
it
ones.
right, but maybe there
Yeah.
was like a little bit of like they were doing something a little bit right and we were doing it like
Yeah.
a little bit wrong. I don't know. I think I don't know. I think like courtesy is fine, but like guilt is not.
Yeah. Yeah. We refer to those people in the States anyway as RODs, ROD, retired on duty.
Oh.
Yeah. Funny
I have
enough.
never heard of that one before. We Australians have nicknames for everyone and everything, which Justin and I have shared probably enough memes and Instagram
Yeah.
reels over the time we've
We share similar humor, that's for sure.
Yes, dirty and inappropriate, just the way we like. So yeah, and so what does you're saying you're like an investigator now for the state, like what does that like role entail? Like obviously it's something that you're doing whilst you're doing all of your masters and everything too. Like what's how does that keep you busy?
It's really boring. I mean, to be honest, it's mind numbing. I have amazing coworkers. They're really nice people, and there's no stress. There's no overtime. I telework. The money's good.
Yeah.
I'm an ethics investigator, so I enforce ethics and public service in the state. So there's like 70,000 employees under jurisdiction that are state employees,
Okay.
whatever state branch, including state troopers even.
Mm-hmm.
That there's multiple laws, ethics laws, and if they're violated, just like a cop, you would enforce criminal laws. So it's the same job. It's just civil. We do monetary fines instead of like criminal penalties. And the reason I got into it in detectives with the ICAC stuff, obviously I was heavy into the forensics. So we would, obviously secure computers and cell phones, do forensic downloads, review them, all that good stuff, right? And so that's mostly what I do. Most of the ethics violations now are like abusing state equipment. So like cell phones, vehicles, laptops for personal use. And so I basically seize stuff all day, download it, and then find people surfing porn, watching Netflix, stupid shit you shouldn't be doing. So it's really boring compared to what I was doing, right? I mean, I talk all this shit about mental health and how it's lacking in law enforcement, but the job is so important. It really is. Yeah. I mean, we solve so many murders, put away so many child predators. I mean, all these amazing things. So, and the work is similar. An investigator is an investigator. And so that's been hard for me, investigating important stuff to like really in the scheme of things, not important stuff.
Yeah.
But something's got to pay for grad school to do what I actually want to do, right? So actually in July, part of my master's program, I have to do 700 hours of internship, mental health related.
Wow.
And so I start the first 100 hours in July.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be working as an intern with a local contract therapist for a local sheriff's office, not the one I worked for, but one nearby here in the state. And so I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I don't get paid, so that's more free time I'm not going to have. But I'm going to actually get to work with first responders again, but on the civilian side, hopefully helping them alleviate some of these issues we're talking about, right?
And also be able to give you that sort of insight of like, oh, is this actually sort of what I want to be doing, or do I want to veer more into like the teaching wellnessy type of like a presentation or a
that's why I chose this one. It's going to be a mixture of all of it. There's going to be like the one-on-one therapy coaching and stuff like that, right? But then it's also going to be like going to in-service training, teaching stuff over PowerPoint, or contracting with like tactical yoga instructors and stuff like that, doing the hands-on, but also mental health stuff. And so it's going to encompass kind of like everything related to what I want to do. And so that's my hope is, 700 hours is a lot. So, and I'm volunteering. So hopefully we'll help put me in the right direction of where I want to go. After graduation. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And it's funny. It was what you were saying was making me think how you went from like, investigating these things that were so incredibly important and obviously like, child sexual abuse and all that kind of thing, like nothing, quite literally nothing could feel more high stakes than that. And then now
Right.
you're like, someone's watching Netflix on their work
Yeah.
phone. Do I really give a fuck?
Yeah, exactly.
But
Exactly.
I'm wondering if you felt sort of the same, like there was a part of me walking away from like working for my police force, and I ended up working for a suicide prevention and crisis counseling organization over here.
Right.
So again, like, important work, but
Yeah.
what I loved was when my shift finished, I got up and I walked away, and there was
Yeah.
no paperwork. There was no lingering, ongoing fucking shit that I would lie in bed at like 2 o'clock in the middle of the night going like, oh, I got to finish that brief and that needs to
Right.
get to court and I got to type up that search warrant and da 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 da
Yeah.
da. Like, that was actually like a massive relief for me. And I think
Yeah.
part of my mindset moving forward was like, I don't want to have a job where I'm stressed about like that kind of ongoing stuff. So,
Yeah.
taking up study was a really good move for me. But was there part of, is there part of you that kind of like that resonates with, where you kind of like, it's
Oh,
actually kind of nice that it's not fucking important?
yes. Yeah. 100%. I also, when I was in detectives, so I also ran our sex offender registry.
Ugh.
And so we had about 200, 300 somewhere sex offenders in our county. And so I was in
Mhm.
charge of like keeping track of them, writing up PC for warrants when they absconded, stuff like that. And
Yeah.
so again, not just for major crime call outs on detectives, but every freaking patrol deputy had my personal cell phone because they'd come across these perverts at 2 a.m. and they would text me, are they supposed to be here? They're around a playground, whatever it may be. And so yeah, to your point, that was the first day that I was retired. I started my new job the morning after my last day in law enforcement, so I had no break. But
Jesus.
I remember vividly, though, my very last night, my new detective that took over for me drove me home and dropped me off.
Mm-hmm.
That night, I went to bed, and for the first time in over 10 years, I silenced my phone and I put it upside down on the charger, and I was like, fuck the world. Nobody is going to bother me. And to this day, sorry, I hope nobody in my family dies or my friends need anything, and I go to bed early. I get up at 4:30 on weekdays because I work tens, and
Yeah.
I go to bed at like 8:30, and my phone shut off. So I wake up a lot because most humans are up till like 10. So like I'll get a text from whoever at like 9, and I'm like, oh, sorry, I'll get back to you tomorrow morning. I don't care anymore. And I swear that's part of what's lowered my stress. And
Yeah.
same, I slept shit for years, and I mean I sleep through the night. I sleep so good now. I get 8 to 9 hours every night. It's amazing.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
it's great.
brilliant. I know.
Yeah.
I'm like, I sort of had to learn to do that probably for different reasons, but like I would always be like, oh, what time is it in Australia? Is it appropriate to like
No.
send someone a text message or something at this point? And that sort of didn't necessarily go both ways. So I just have to silence mine, because otherwise I just wake up from like shit from Australia and I'm like, guys, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. But
Yeah.
that silent button on the phone is and I think as well, for a long time there was probably like a bit of a sense of FOMO. You're kind of like, oh, I kind of want to know what's going on and all that kind of thing. And now I'm like, nah,
Yeah.
I will find out at 5 a.m. when I get up to work out.
Yeah. I just went and grabbed a beer with one of my former coworkers, actually my detective corporal, 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
Haven't seen him for like a year and a half, and I was curious, so I asked, I'm like, how are the new people doing? What promotions have happened? And then for like an hour, I just heard the gossip and the drama, and it was it was fun for about 10 minutes, and then I was like, I checked out. I was like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care. Yeah, sorry, but
Yeah. Are there many people from that world that you sort of still keep in contact with?
no, probably 4 or 5. That's it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question, because I'd heard that from other people, and everyone always says no matter how important you were, what a great job you did, whatever, you could be the top hot shot in your agency, most arrests, it doesn't matter, whatever it is,
Yeah.
the day you retire, nobody gives a shit, but you're quickly forgotten because you're no longer part of that. You're not part of that circle. You're a civilian.
Yeah.
And 100% true. I mean, I was invited to a wedding of one of my former canine deputies, and I still keep in touch with him and his wife and like 2 others, but that's it out of the entire agency, right? Yeah, it's nature of the beast, and that's also, if I ran all the police academies in the country, that would be something I would drive home to all these new recruits too. Is we're all sucked into this like incestuous first responder world where I had civilian friends when I started, but and I get it. They don't understand the job or what we do or what we see or the camaraderie of your new coworkers. I understand all those arguments, but we have to keep civilian friends because they keep us normal. And it's somebody to go to if you need to talk, you're having a bad time that won't talk shit to all your coworkers. Yeah. There's a million reasons to keep civilian friends. And one of them is because one day you're going to have to retire and your circle is going to get really small really quick. And so, yeah, definitely witness that.
No, and that's definitely something that I agree with, and I think for my personal experience, I think it's so easy to become really, really cynical and really hard, and it happens to you quickly. Not just from what you see, but you get kind of influenced by, like when I first started, I worked with like a whole bunch of like older men who'd been on the job for like 20 years and they were cranky and all of the things. And I got like, influenced heavily by their, fucking cynicism and everything like that. And outside friends like know you before that. And, if they're good friends, they fucking call you out on it. And I think it helps you, like you're saying, not get drawn into that like kind of tunnel, closed-minded, incestuous life. And I still have like a whole bunch of like friends who were still from the police force, but I equally still have like a lot of friends who I've known since I was like 16 years old.
That's good.
And I think it's important because I think they keep you in check.
Yeah.
And so moving forward, because obviously you retired from the police force at like the ripe old age of what, like 41, 42 maybe?
I was 42. Yeah.
And anyone who sort of sees you on the socials, like you clearly have, like you're saying, I would almost just describe it as like a thirst for life. Like you travel a lot, which is sort of fairly rare and unique for like Americans. Like, you go to Europe and do all those kind of things. Like what does your sort of ultimate goal or maybe like ideal future look like for you sort of moving forward after like everything you've known and everything you've experienced?
I mean, if I obviously win the lottery would be ideal, but I mean, in a perfect situation, if I could find a way, and that's another reason, honestly, I chose this career path with the way things are going. Thanks COVID, telehealth. A lot of mental health therapists, they do it full-time tele, it's only over the screen. Yeah. They don't go to an office. And then I've always loved to teach. I've all throughout my law enforcement career, I taught, domestic violence, canine to like local, but also like all the state trooper cadets.
Yeah, you were an FTO for a while, weren't you?
Yeah, an FTO, and I love teaching aspect of it too. And so part of me almost would like to teach like psychology or criminal justice, like community college or undergraduate, and that too. A lot of those jobs full-time online only now. And so in a perfect world, if I could, as I get older, my law enforcement retirement checks don't come in until I'm 53. So that's another 9 years. But after that, if I could have like a home base, and I'd be fine with like a 600 square foot condo just to pay it off, home base. And then if I could take my trusty laptop and Wi-Fi and travel, honestly, I would love to spend a month in England, go back to Paris, just bounce around and live, under my means so I could afford it.
Yeah.
But if I could find a way to travel while working, that would be idealistic for me. There's so much world to see. And I think part of it is because I grew up very sheltered, upper middle class, strictly white neighborhood in middle USA, but then I was stripped away and taken to Canada, and I think at 13 as a foreign country, really in that young mind. And then from there, then I would travel down to California, Mexico, like not worldly, but at that young age, it opened my eyes to, wow, like everywhere you go is different and cool. The people are different, but the same. And I got hooked young, and then I never took vacation in law enforcement. And then I went to France when I was in detectives once, and then I really got hooked then. And now that I can do it, I mean, my bucket list just keeps getting longer. I mean,
time. And clearly Australia and the Southern Hemisphere is very high on that list.
It is on my list. I will pick your brain for places to go, but yeah, anyone who hasn't traveled needs to try it at least once. And I would argue to say go somewhere weird.
Yeah.
Just do it. It's an eye opening experience, and you would be surprised. Even if you don't understand the language, you'd be surprised how similar we all are. We
Yeah.
all have to work. We all hate it. We want good family, friends, food, and alcohol. And you know what? I mean, it's pretty much the same everywhere you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
No, I think I sort of didn't travel mostly till sort of like my mid to late 20s, and it's weirdly how I met my husband. But I think something I loved is not only all just like the different food and culture, but like the history. So like
yeah,
Australia, in comparison to a lot of other colonized countries from like the English and stuff like that, where we're like relatively young. And we were, founded in like the 1770s, I think, or quote unquote discovered.
right.
And because
Or it's discovered it's the same.
our indigenous population have been there for maybe 60,000
Yeah,
years before that, but obviously
yeah,
that's another podcast. But the history, like walking through Pompeii, standing in front of the
yeah,
Colosseum, hiking up the Eiffel Tower, like just all
yeah.
of the things that Europe has to offer. And I've been to a lot more of the more sort of popularized sort of places, but like my husband is a massive metalhead. So
Okay.
like metal music, like heavy metal is like sort of through all of like strange European countries. So he's been to
Yeah,
just, like Finland and Estonia and like all these kind of like weird places, and it's just there's just such a big beautiful wide world outside of everything that we know, and it's good to kind of put yourself out of your comfort zone and, like you were saying, like
yeah.
try new things. And we were
100%. I mean, a lot of Americans that haven't traveled, like I've heard people say this, friends of mine, family, oh, we did like the historic tour in New Orleans, like,
yeah
and then like, I was in Italy and I was walking through the Roman Colosseum, and
oh
I forget what year now, but it was like construction started in like
yeah
year like 26 or something, like 026.
I
Like,
know I
I mean, it's
know.
just mind boggling. Yeah.
I was just showing my son a picture of, we said something about the Colosseum. I'm like, I've been there, and he's like, no, you haven't. I'm like, I'll show you that
Yeah.
I have. I'm like, I have photographic proof, buddy. Um, but it's funny that like I didn't understand why a lot of Americans don't travel until I moved here, and because like the average American working an average job, like they get maybe 2 weeks leave a year,
Yeah.
and you kind of like it limits them so much in that respect. And then like how you're saying, we use like something like 800 and something hours of like paid leave, like that's fucking criminal.
Yeah, we do a lot of things wrong in this country. I'll argue that all day, and one of them is our work ethic. It's disgusting, really. I mean, we work ourselves to death. Even now in my low key non stress civilian job, I emailed somebody yesterday or a couple days ago about something, and I got the auto email reply, and it was essentially like, I'm currently on 2 weeks vacation. I'm still checking my emails. My response may be delayed. My apologies. And I was like, what the fuck? Like,
You're
burn
like
your shit
on
off.
holiday, yeah.
Yeah, and then like you say, you go to Europe and it's like middle of the day on a weekday, and all the businesses are closed, and everyone's getting drunk midday, and it's like they know how to live life. I mean,
Exactly.
they work like maybe 30-ish hours a week. They don't check their phones at night or weekends. I tell you that. And when
Yeah.
they're on holiday, they're on holiday.
Well,
And look at their
also
stress level.
their healthcare is not tied to their employment, which is
Yeah, well, there's
again.
that too, but also look at the health issues and the differences. How many Americans are obese and on 27 medications? You know, stress causes a
Exactly.
lot of health issues. So,
It sure does.
yeah,
All right. Well, I have taken up a lot of your time, Justin, and I really appreciate you coming on.
of course.
I typically end these podcast episodes by asking the guest 2 questions. So the name of the podcast is "I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness," and it comes from the idea that darkness permeates a lot of the roles that we perform as first responders, and obviously some of the stuff that you've shared with us today. It's evident that you have seen some darkness along your travels. So the first question is, what do you do to be able to hold space for your darkness?
I think just in the title, I mean, you need to hold some form of space. And when I say that, it's what do we all do? We all bury it down, right? You go to call after call and you just keep pushing it down until there's no more room. And then it starts coming out, whether it's physical symptoms or emotional or both. And so we need to be taught and learn to just put aside a space for all the shit and the darkness and the trauma, and don't shove it down. And when the time's appropriate, obviously in the middle of a call or whatever, we can't break down and ask for therapy right then in the moment. But you need to remember the things that we're witnessing and we're seeing. And at some point when it's appropriate, and preferably with professional help, address it. It's like the white elephant in the room, it's not going to go away until it's openly discussed. And so we need to hold the space, and when it's appropriate, dive into that space and discuss it and learn it and grow from it.
No, I really like that. And I think as well from, I'm at the very, very start of my education, and you're, way further along than me, but I think there's something to be said for, like I've heard it described about like trauma. It actually kind of resides in your body. It doesn't always sort of like, or it, gets kind of stuck in your head, but like you feel it here. So like you're saying, in order to be able to process it appropriately, you have to give it the opportunity to.
Yeah, a great book. It's called The Body Keeps the Score. I mean, it's like a 400-page book. It talks all about that. I mean, there's tons of evidence that shows a lot of physical ailments and symptoms are stemming from what's in our brain and not being dealt with. Yeah, for sure.
100%. Oh, I think everyone loves Bessel.
Yeah.
And the second question is, what can someone do for you, whether it's like a friend or a partner or anything like that, in order to help you and support you in holding space for that darkness?
I think just sit in that space with them, right? Check in on our people. Don't avoid it. Don't ignore it. Call people out on their shit, maybe ask somebody a few times how they are, because our immediate response as a first responder is going to be, I'm fine, I'm good.
Living the dream.
Yeah, ask them a few more times. You'd be surprised, the responses may change and the cracks may start to show a little bit. Mm-hmm. But whether you're a spouse, a friend, a coworker, a peer mentor, whatever it may be, is just meet them in that darkness. Just sit with them. You don't need to tell them what to do. Even if you've lived that same experience, there's no, I've heard it called like a trauma trophy, oh, I've experienced that shooting too, and I've gotten through it doing this. It doesn't matter. That's you. You're not them. So just meet them where they're at in that darkness, that space, and just sit with them and just listen and just let them know that you're going to be there and hold space for them as long as you need, and just don't ignore it is a big thing. It's not going to go away. So, and that's the agencies and the leaders too, can't keep sweeping the shit under the rug.
No,
so
definitely not.
Face it head on. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. All right. Yeah. Thank you for coming on, Justin, and having this conversation with me today and being open and honest about your experiences. And I really wish you well in your studies, and hopefully, you find whatever it is that you want to be doing with your future, and live it well and travel lots.
It's my intent, and ditto. I appreciate your time. Thanks, Erin.
All right. Thanks, mate. All right. This has been another episode of I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness, a first responder mental health podcast. I've been your host, Erin Jane. And as always, let me listen in a way you've never been heard. Cheers.
Hi, guys. It's Erin Jane here. Firstly, thank you for listening to I Will Hold Space for Your Darkness. This podcast really is for you, the listener. And I hope you're finding as much value in listening to these conversations as I am in having them. If you'd like to offer any feedback, suggest a subject matter, are interested in being a podcast guest, or would like to get in contact to receive first responder life and wellness coaching services, please reach out. You can find me on Instagram at Erin Jane Coaching, or the dedicated podcast account, ErinJane_Darkness Podcast, or my website, www.erinjanecoaching.com. I look forward to hearing from you, and I'm so grateful to have you as part of this darkness community. Cheers.